Welcome to the Molecules and Minerals podcast. I'm Stephen Goldman. I'm a former trial lawyer, corporate director, and executive. I'm here today with David D'Onofrio, CEO of White Gold Corp, a Toronto-based gold exploration company operating in the prolific White Gold District located south of Dawson City in the Yukon. Apart from being the CEO of White Gold, David is the CFO of Toronto-based merchant bank PowerOne Group, and he's a chartered professional accountant. White Gold owns a portfolio of over 15,000 quartz claims across 21 properties covering a massive 305,000 hectares. That's approximately 750,000 acres, or more than 3,000 square kilometers, representing approximately 40% of the Yukon's White Gold District. The White Gold District itself has become a hot area, which also now hosts both the world-class coffee project with more than 3.8 million ounces of gold and the casino project, which is a copper-gold porphyry. The White Gold District is also now the focal point of the Yukon government's Canadian $468 million infrastructure investment plan, which includes upgrading the road from Dawson City to the coffee project, passing through White Gold Corp's property. The company's flagship White Gold project has 4 near-surface, open-pittable gold deposits, the Golden Saddle, Arc, Ryan Surprise, and VG, which according to the most recent mineral resource estimate prepared in accordance with NI 43-101 reporting, collectively contains more than 3 million ounces of gold, including 1.7 million ounces in the indicated resource category and just under 1.3 million ounces in the inferred resource category. White Gold's largest shareholder is Agnico Eagle, which is one of the world's largest gold producers and owns approximately 19% of White Gold. As well, one of White Gold's largest shareholders is Canadian merchant bank PowerOne Corporation. The upcoming catalyst includes the release of additional results from its 2025 diamond drill program, the delivery of a maiden preliminary economic assessment PEA on its flagship White Gold project, which is expected before the end of Q2, and details of the company's expected 25,000 plus meter drill program, which is fully funded from a $23 million financing completed in October, which will be the company's largest drilling program ever. And finally, there is a recently announced spin-out of its non-gold critical mineral assets into a new public company. David's going to discuss all of the foregoing in more detail in this podcast. Just by way of background, I first met David back in late 2018 when I was the CEO of Comstock Metals Limited, and I was selling Comstock's interest in the VG gold deposit. And that transaction actually closed in March of 2019, which is almost 7 years ago. And as I recall, at that time, David and I got to know each other through that sale. And part of the consideration of that transaction was the receipt of common shares of White Gold, which have subsequently been distributed to Comstock shareholders, including myself. And I continue to be a shareholder of White Gold. White Gold is listed on the TSX Venture Exchange and the OTCQX Exchange, and it has a market cap of approximately 360 million Canadian, or US 272 million, with no debt. So David, can you tell us about your background and how you ended up as CEO of White Gold Corp?
Thank you very much for having me here, and that was quite an excellent overview of the company.
Thank you.
It's a long story and a fun one, and a really excellent experience. So as you did mention, I am a principal at PowerOne Capital, this merchant bank that's been around about 25 years now, founded by Pat DiCapo, who I think over the past 25 years has developed a really excellent reputation as a leading financier within the country. We're not exclusively resource-based investors. However, that is a sector where we have done probably the majority of our investment, and I think where we really have built up a proprietary knowledge base and relationship network that's only come to serve to be more and more valuable as we've grown up and got older. And part of that is something which I think you may be aware of in the industry. This has not seen a big inflow of new talent in the last several decades. So which is going to provide its own issues, I think, going forward, but it does create a lot of opportunities for guys like us who have been doing it for so long. PowerOne, where we may differentiate ourselves from other investment groups, we look at ourselves as strategic capital partners, and we typically look for earlier stage opportunities. We're an entrepreneurial group, and we consider what we're providing to be formational capital. Usually, this is working with founders, really putting up that highest risk type capital early on. But where we differ is as a merchant bank and just sort of based on, how we like to operate as investors, we really roll up our sleeves and work very closely with these opportunities as they come up. And as a strategic capital investor, what we mean by that is we'll look for opportunities to be investing our own capital, but then bring alongside us other capital or other parties that will be able to provide value in different capacities for these companies as they continue to grow. So the companies will have baked into their capital structure at very early stage, the right audience that they need. And that the audience will change on a situation by situation basis. But generally speaking, it'll be other individuals that can add sector expertise. It'll be individuals that have access to larger pools of capital. A lot of what we do is in the public space. It'll be relationships within the capital markets community, within the institutional brokerage community. A lot of times it's relationships with the larger companies. We've been fortunate that over the last 25 years, we've been able to make a number of very significant discoveries and then go on to sell them to the major mining companies, which is a typical life cycle that you'll see in this industry. You can always go on and build a mine, which we've done as well. And there's certain trade-offs to doing that. But we found that type of a formula has worked well for us. And even if it means us having to give up some economics early on, we're happy to do that because it improves the chances of success as the companies move forward, and it improves the potential for the size of the prize. As things work out. When you're dealing in the junior markets, this is a high risk type place. They don't always work out. But I think that's another point which really differentiates PowerOne. We will stick with these ventures through thick and thin and do whatever we can to help them, whether it's providing our own expertise, working very closely with teams, providing additional resources. And if for whatever reason something does not work out, we'll look to be able to somehow manufacture a pivot so that the other co-investors alongside of us have another kick at the can to make a return. And, White Gold's kind of a perfect example of that, where it was originally a company called G4G Resources. They had these iron sand projects in Guatemala, and that just didn't work out for political and other reasons. We found these opportunities in the Yukon. We used that vehicle. We brought along a lot of the same investor group, and here we are today on the precipice of, I think, the evolution of what can and may be one of Canada's next great mining camps.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. And I was particularly interested in how your assets came about with the help of Sean Ryan, who's quite famous in Canada as a
Yeah.
person who has discovered major gold deposits, including white gold and coffee, which is right next to you to the south.
And originally the VG as well. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
it's an
yeah,
amazing story. He's an amazing person. And, outside of the opportunity from a capital perspective here, I think, when you hear the Sean Ryan story, like, I'm sure they will write a book on it and maybe a movie. It's just such a heartwarming type of a story. So you have this individual, he grows up in Timmins, Ontario. He's in a mining family, follows, kind of the path of his parents, like a lot of people do in these small mining towns, gets into the industry, And even though he's not formally educated in geology, he's one of those individuals that has a limitless thirst for knowledge. He does the studying, and you would not know that he has not gone through and done a PhD in geology just by how much he's learned. He also is an incredibly big thinker and has a voracious appetite for adventure. And one of those adventures to him was to go to the Yukon to try to find the source of the Klondike. And for people that may, not be fully aware, our property package where Sean has had the most of his success in that area, this is what's known as the Klondike area of the Yukon. This was the epicenter of the infamous gold rush, which started in 1899. It is still incredibly active to this day. You can find the shows. I think it's on the History Channel where they have, Yukon Gold Rush, where it's a big, big industry. And it's such a prolific region. It's produced over 20 million ounces of placer gold to date, and I'm sure there's much more. Now, when we talk about placer gold, all that is gold that's literally sitting on the surface. So it started, in the old days with your prospector in the river. As you may have seen the images over the years. It is now incredibly modernized. You have big equipment moving large amounts of earth into processing mills. But as in mining terms, it's still very small scale, kind of mom and pop type operations, but the area is littered with it. So 20 million ounces of placer gold puts that up there with one of the richest gold fields in the world. So as Sean's there, in his brain, he's like, there's no way, like that gold did not come from the earth. Geologically, it had to be fed by some sort of deep-seated structure. I'm going to go there and find the source of this placer. And statistically, in these big gold fields, there's usually 2 to 3 times more gold in the bedrock below in other areas that just has not made its way to surface. And that adventure started in 2004, where he basically, left everything at home with him and his wife, took on the challenge. And when they got there, they very quickly realized why no one has found it so far, right? The first question people may have, which is the question we had at PowerOne, we brought this opportunity, say, Sean, how has nobody done this yet? Like it's in the Yukon. If you live in Vancouver, it's a 3-hour flight. It's not the remote jungles of Africa or, maybe some dangerous areas in other places around the world. What he had figured out, and it took him 5 years to really crack the code, is this part of Canada has a different terrain than most of the other areas where you see these other big mining camps. And specifically, that difference is generated because this part of the Yukon was not glaciated. So when the last ice age came and it went through the continent and through Ontario and Quebec, these glacials, their activity acted almost like big bulldozers, moving most of the overburden, exposing the bedrock, which is termed outcrop. So most prospectors in Canada, that's their primary tool. They'll get out in the field or dropped off in a helicopter. They'll have their little ball peen hammer, see the outcrop. If it looks prospective, take their samples, bring it to the lab. When they got to this part of Canada, there's no outcrop. It didn't work. They tried this, that, and the other thing, and eventually quit. Sean didn't quit. He spent years and years doing research, living literally in a 10-foot by 10-foot tin shack with his wife, with no running water in the cold Yukon winters, until he was able to figure out how to identify these mineralized systems. And then as he did that, he would partner with larger exploration outfits to look, to drill, to find, to make these discoveries. And that's exactly what he did. And now he's been credited with millions of ounces of gold discovery in this area and other areas, the most significant of which is in White Gold. So the coffee project next door, which I believe is now at the point of heading to construction, it was recently just acquired by Pierre Lassonde, who is one of the most well-respected mining investors and mine builders on the planet. I think that speaks volumes to it, what's going to be happening. And in a mining business, it's very cyclical, right? So we were there, the gold was still there. It's just we were at a different time in the market. Now it's all starting to happen. But what Sean did that was so exceptionally brilliant, which is where I think a lot of the additional value is going to come within White Gold, Once he realized he had cracked the code, he took that same protocol and basically it covered the entire Klondike area. So we're talking, 120 kilometers north-south by 50, 60 kilometers east-west. And from that, cherry-picked what he felt to be the most prospective properties and consolidated those into White Gold. So it is an enormous land package for a junior mining company by any standards, but it's not like it was just a land grab. Each property was
Right.
specifically curated. And to date, we've seen our own remarkable success, which we can touch on. But to your point, the story is remarkable. He was actually covered on New York Times Magazine twice because of this story. And you hear just the history with, a pregnant wife in the cold, and what he had to do, especially those days without modern communication, uh, hitching rides with the government workers that are, doing the forestry stuff and getting dropped off in the bush for days on end, not knowing if you come out or not. But
Right.
it's an amazing, amazing opportunity.
It is quite incredible, and I know he remains a technical advisor, I believe, to White Gold.
Yeah, he's one of our largest shareholders on the board. He's very, very involved to this day.
And from what I'm reading, although White Gold owns 40% of the White Gold district, at least what I'm reading is that you actually probably own 80% of the prospective targets that are.
That's exactly
Yeah.
right. Yeah. So he's done the work, and we, either him or with White Gold, we've done the work. So what we own today is all priority targets. It's seen the work. There's other great projects in the area, particularly this casino and the coffee. So we don't own those, but those are going to play a big part as this camp evolves. And actually, I think we will benefit from them being a little bit further advanced, because with their development is going to bring a ton of infrastructure, and that infrastructure will really unlock the leverage to the ownership of an entire camp, which is what we believe this is. From an investment thesis, what we looked at is that it was not just the opportunity to maybe find a mine, it was the opportunity to find and own an entire camp. And the analogy I'll use is, imagine you had the opportunity to go back in time 50 years and own 85% of the best targets in all of Val-d'Or or Timmins or the Nevada Gold. Like, what would that be worth today? I don't think I have enough zeros on my
Yes,
calculator
no, that's true, and you can see, and I believe the center of your White Gold project is very close to Coffee, which just south of you, is about 40 kilometers away. Is that my
Yeah,
understanding?
exactly. Even a little bit less than that.
Amazing. So, I mean, you've had the benefit of Sean Ryan's technical experience. You've got Agnico Eagle as a partner, 19% interest. And what role have they played, at least from a technical and financial point of view? I take it they don't have a board seat.
They have the right to a board seat, but we have a great relationship with them. And that, I think, actually ties in nice as a segue to my analogy of how we believe this could be the next Val-d'Or. As you know, Agnico is one of the largest and most highly respected mining companies in the world, and they have gotten that way by owning entire districts. So you see how they operate like that in Quebec. And I do believe, so having a company like that in a junior mining company is a huge validation of the opportunity. And I do believe they share our vision that this is a camp that's in its very early stages of evolution, although it's now continued to progress. And we're going to start, like, when's a camp a camp? I think we're going to start seeing mines getting built next year. Now it's really a camp. They have been a
Yeah,
tremendous
yeah,
partner. When we first partnered with Sean Ryan, between PowerOne and Sean Ryan back in 2017, that was right on the heels of Sean's original Coffee Discover being acquired by Gold Corp. And Gold Corp paid up $520 million for it at the time in 2016. And it was a very hotly contested process, and we had known several of the other major mining companies were interested. So we thought, hey, this would be a good idea. Maybe we should go talk to them to see if they want to get involved. Now, it was very early for a major to want to get involved in a project like this. However, because of the uniqueness of the opportunity in such a prolific area that's seen so much recent exploration success, they were actually all very interested in getting involved. And from that group, we chose Agnico for a couple of reasons. Number one, they are excellent operators in the north. And number two, they offered us full access to their technical expertise. And for a small team with limited resources to be able to have access to the technical resources of one of the best mining companies in the world, that was very compelling. And they have
yeah,
been an incredible
yeah.
partner ever since. They're very involved. They participated financially in every financing and maintained their pro rata all the way along. And what we see now is they're continuing to do more and more work within the Yukon evaluating projects. And they actually have just recently invested in our neighboring property, which is this coffee. So that coffee is
Yes.
owned by a company called Fuerte now. And just to give the history there, so it was Kaminak. Kaminak got acquired, which actually is a separate point, something I think is relevant, for people that are valuing the industry from an investment perspective. Kaminak was acquired for $180 an ounce in 2016 when gold was for sure under $1,800. So it was about 10% the spot price. Most of these juniors now are still trading probably closer to 2% or 1% of the spot price. So I think as the cycle matures a bit and the capital starts to move to the smaller players, we should just see an entire re-rating for the group, and then the ones that have the better assets and the better places and the better growth potential, I think will continue to re-rate from there. Anyways, so,
Right.
so Kaminak was bought by Gold Corp. Gold Corp was racing to put into production. And frankly, that would have been in our best interest because at the time, you would have now had your camp, the infrastructure would have come in, this resource gateway program you mentioned. However, Gold Corp was then bought by Newmont. Now, Newmont changed the strategy a little bit. They said, we want to advance it through permitting and continue to grow it. So they actually did a tremendous amount of work. They got it permitted, but because it was Newmont and it's so big, it was never something they had to disclose publicly. So the world never really knew what was happening in the district. We knew, of course, but nobody else did. And things got kind of quiet in the Yukon. Around the same time, there was the issue with Victoria Gold, where they had their heap leach failure, which created other, I'll call it a negative overhang. And the sector and the area just sort of got glossed over. People were focused more on Guyana and obviously Quebec and Ontario. But that's really all changed recently. As companies have started to do some more work in the Yukon, they've just been incredibly successful at the drill bit. And, our new VP of exploration, Dylan Langell, who just joined us from Great Bear, which is one of the other more significant discoveries in Canada, he says, listen, the Yukon is one of the most geologically prospective areas in Canada, but it hasn't seen the work. It's like 20 or 30 years behind Ontario and Quebec. Now that they've started to see the work, you have discoveries like they have in Snowline, where they discovered 9 million ounces of gold, and it's just adding to the allure. And you have Sitka and Banyan, and obviously ourselves and the coffee. But anyway, so just back to the coffee. So as Newmont was looking to divest of some of their non-core assets over the last couple of years, one of those was the coffee, which now, that could have went to anyone. The group that did buy it, I think, was a blessing for us because you have Newmont. Basically, the way they structured it is they had this public vehicle called Fuerte. Newmont rolled the coffee in. They took back a bunch of equity. So they're big shareholders still. I think that kind of shows their views on the project. Obviously, Pierre Lassonde and his group came in, incredibly well-respected and capable individuals. And then they also brought Agnico in as a shareholder, which I think further validates to the public their potential interest in the Yukon and in this area in particular.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's very, very exciting. As I was doing a bit of a deep dive on White Gold in preparation for our chat. So a couple things really struck me, apart from what we just talked about with Agnico, and I'll circle back to that as where I think there's some potential M&A activity in the future, but we'll get there in a moment. But right now, this is, and tell me if I have this right. I mean, you've got a 3 million ounce project. You filed your 43-101 back in October, and I looked at the pricing. The assumption was $2,250 US gold. That was the assumption. Clearly we're trading gold spot is closer to 5,000. If you did an updated 43-101 today, and I'm sure your PEA will be there, it's not going to be at 5,000, but is it going to be, is it going to be 3,200, 3,500?
Well, what you're starting to see in the market now is these projects being performed or put together on around a 3,000. Now it's moving. They like to use like a 2-year trailing average, typically, these engineering
Yeah.
groups. So it most
Yeah.
likely will be over 3,000. From our perspective, as shareholders and owners, we always try to look at it as, on the most conservative basis. And if something works on a conservative level, then everything is kind of gravy from there. Now, what's interesting for White Gold, listen, the fact that gold price is going up I'm happy about that, of course. It's brought a lot of interest into the sector, but frankly, what's so unique about this white gold discovery versus everything else in the Yukon and most other projects in Canada is the grade. So our 3 million ounces, it's the highest grade project in all the Yukon. It's the top 10 highest grade open pitable project in all of Canada. And I recall as we started performing internal desktop economic analysis a couple of years ago, those were being done at sub $2,000 gold. And even then, it was looking very interesting. So a project like this doesn't necessarily need high gold prices. And then frankly, high gold prices, sometimes it's confusion for the market because now a lot of these marginal projects might look interesting on paper. But like, as an investor, one thing we like to do is let's go to take the downside scenario. And I think with that, at $2,000 gold, we'll have a great project. If you look at $3,000 gold, it's going to be even better. And then listen, let's see where it goes from there. It'll be
Yeah.
pretty exceptional. But what I'm extremely excited for our PEA, because I think that will be the watershed moment where it'll really demonstrate to the investment community how valuable this asset is because of these grades, because of the fact they come to surface, all the deposits are very shallow. Those are the types of things that'll drive stronger economics, faster paybacks, and that's the kind of thing you want to see when you're looking to build a mine. So it's really exciting from that perspective, and I think what else that does, that gets us in front of a more institutional audience. Like now, the one thing about white gold, which is a fact, is it's not a well-known story. Now, the Yukon's gotten really hot again, as you mentioned, and this became abundantly clear to me when I was at the Beaver Creek conference in September in Beaver Creek, Colorado. It's the largest precious metal junior mining conference in the world. It's the best of the best type of investors there, the majors. And what I saw that became abundantly clear, like obviously the junior sector was starting to become of interest now with the gold price where it is. Yukon was hot again, mainly because the studies had now been published on what happened at Victoria Eagle Mine. I think people were comfortable that there was a path to being fixed. You have companies like Snowline and Sitka and Banyan having very, great traction in the marketplace. But what we saw in these meetings is white gold was on nobody's radar. And you'd sit in the meeting and first of all, they're like, oh, we didn't know you had a resource. We didn't know it was 3 million ounces. We didn't know it was the highest grade. Oh my God. And you have this land pack, it's like 10 times bigger. And the lights would, you just see it. And then the third or the fourth sort of fact that would really kind of, put them over the edge and becoming shareholders is because we're so unknown, we traded a very significant discount on a dollar per ounce basis compared to our peer group. So any of these investors or these analysts that like these other companies, white gold really looked like, a no-brainer to them. And that's actually still the case today. It's improved a little bit. And the reason for that, what I believe, which is not necessarily a bad thing because it came out of a good place. All of our financings in the past several years, we've done them internally between PowerOne, between Agnico. We didn't really have to go out to the street, and maybe it was too small for the street. So because of that, we didn't have institutional analyst coverage. We've never done any institutional marketing. So the story just kind of kept under the radar. But we did each year ensure to raise enough money to be able to continue to advance these projects, demonstrate the growth potential, and build value. So as and when the market cycle came, we'd have a very interesting story to tell. Now, this most recent financing we did in the fall of 25, we did by design ensure to bring in the street specifically to allow us to build out our exposure base. And that's worked out very well. We've just recently had our first institutional research report published a couple of weeks ago by Claris Securities. I think they did an excellent job of laying out what the opportunity can look like. And they published targets much, much higher than what we're trading today. So we're great to see that. And that's allowed us to start to do some marketing. So we've actually, in fact, just this week had our first formal institutional marketing roadshow, which was excellent, getting in front of some of the best types of investors around. And it was the same story over and over again, where this company, for what it has today, is undervalued. So, these institutional investors also like to protect their downside. So they see significant upside for the company to re-rate as it gets better known, as more attention comes to the area, which is happening now. And then there's also a number of levers in the very near term that could deliver additional value, including this PEA that we touched on, the spin out of some of these other discoveries we made, which are critical mineral focused, and then this drill program that's coming up, which I think will be a real needle mover. Because the other thing that White Gold has not had the benefit of yet, unlike some of these other companies, is a very big drill program in the last couple of years. Like these other companies, they've done their big financing, they had their 30 and 50,000 meter programs. And so the White Gold project, notwithstanding the fact that it's already 3 million ounces and it's so prospective, it's actually seen the least amount of drilling of any of the companies in the Yukon. And the size of the deposits are only limited by the amount of drilling that's been done. So each one of those is wide open for expansion. And to complement that, the work that we have been doing the last couple of years hasn't been on the direct deposits themselves as much. It's been looking for new zones of mineralization in and around the deposit. And we've been extremely successful there. We've made these new discoveries. So this year, when we come back under Dylan's guidance, who's really opened our eyes to actually even more opportunity than we realized on our flagship deposit, we'll continue to grow our known zones, but also follow up on these other targets. And I believe that we will be able to meaningfully increase the amount of gold we have in our resources by the end of this year again.
Well, it did strike me, after reading your mineral resource update back in October at 3 million ounces, and then I believe it was early November you released some additional drilling results, which included a very impressive 6.9 grams per ton over 50.2 meters at Golden Saddle. That's a very high grade, shallow. I can see why you're excited, and I know there's been talk. It's not what you say, but what others have been saying, that they're hoping with you've got is it a 25 to 30,000 meter
Yep,
plan program?
exactly.
Fully
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 funded.
funded with your 23 million that you raised, that you're on your way to 4 or 5 million ounces. Of course, that's speculative, but certainly if you keep hitting these high grade hits, you could be on your way. And of course, with the gold prices going up, it just makes it just more attractive. So congratulations. It's just great to see. So let me ask this. When I first met you and we first chatted, we used to, speculate back in
Yeah.
2019. And I won't go through all of our conversations by any means, because we were just kind of, talking over a proverbial beer, so to speak. We're quite optimistic, and of course, your patience has been phenomenal, because that's now we are 7 years later, and you've had patient money, and the share price tanked over the years, and now has recovered. I think it's gone up sixfold over the past year, so everyone's quite pleased with the recovery. Um, but there was a time then that the business model of White Gold was to generate new deposits and spin them out. But now it looks like you're back to focusing on your White Gold project. You're getting your PEA. It looks like you're on your way perhaps to a pre-feas, a feasibility, perhaps turn it into mine. And I guess as you go along, you're upgrading the value of each ounce. So if you have a 5 million ounce deposit, that's worth more per ounce than a 2 million ounce deposit, et cetera. So perhaps you could talk about the process of value creation and where you're hoping to take White
It's an
Gold.
interesting question. It's a very important question for all investors to understand the strategy of these companies. So I'm glad you asked that. And you want to know that when you're looking at a company. Are these guys, they're just there as a lifestyle to, drill for fun, or do they actually have a business plan? I would say the way things are today, if you look at the history of PowerOne, we're a very transactional group and we're working in the best interest of shareholders. Historically, we have, I would say, had more of a tendency to sell our projects to majors to build it, because building a mine is hard. It takes a special skill set, and it also can produce, depending how you're looking at it, great returns, because, you can avoid the additional time and additional risk as you build it. Now, with that said, when you build a mine, once it's built and once it's operating, and if you're in a metals environment like today, like you're seeing with all these other gold producers, they are literally just printing money. So there's a good argument for both, and you have to evaluate the pros and cons as you go along. But I do still believe this company can be set up to, spin out is one maybe way to term it, but that was always our idea, is to make a discovery, show that there's a critical mass there with additional upside. I think that's how you can get your best value. For people that maybe aren't as familiar with the industry, there's the Lassonde curve, which is a great way to look at it.
Sure.
And you see that you
Yeah.
have your concept, you have to do your work, you have your discovery, you get this great valuation, and then in that permitting phase, the valuation will kind of dip and flatline for a while. Not because you're not creating value. I think it's just it's not a very exciting time, right? You don't have investors waiting on drill holes. But then once it goes into production, then you see the value create. And then from there, that's when you have exceptional amount of value create. And a great example might be like Orla. That's one of Pierre Lassonde's other projects. And now, they're taking it from discovery over several years. It's now a producer, and I think it's got a $6 or $9 billion market cap. And from what I've heard and that's kind of their game plan for the coffee. So there's certainly opportunity there. But when you have a company that like White Gold probably has 5 times more properties at least than most of these junior mining companies, you could be in a scenario where, let's take the Gold Saddle or our White Gold flagship property. Let's say, we'll grow it this year. And then you also want to, you get value for ounces that you haven't proved yet, but we have visibility for them to come. And let's say we can go to 4 into 5 million ounce type visibility within a couple of years. There could be a scenario where just that one asset could be sold, and that's sitting on 2 properties. So it's 2 of our 21 different properties, and you could have that sold, take the proceeds, distribute that out to your shareholders, and then they get paid that way. You keep a little bit back, and you use that to fund your exploration, continue to go forward. And we've actually started to do that. So as we've been doing this work using Sean's special protocol that led to all the discoveries in the district, part of that effort has led to the discovery of mineralization that was not gold, particularly copper, molybdenum, tungsten, and a few of these other critical minerals, which really should not come as a total surprise, being the Yukon is mineralogically rich as it is. But also in our area, we have this Casino deposit you mentioned. That is the largest undeveloped copper gold porphyry in Canada. These porphyries typically happen in clusters, so it would actually be unlikely not to see something else around there. And several of our properties are in and around it, and we've identified targets that look very similar. Furthermore, as you go south in that area, there's a very well-known copper belt. It's this Big Creek Fault. And you have the Minto mine there, another copper deposit. So we were pleased to find that. We think there's a lot of prospectivity, but we are, as a company, and this is what I talked about earlier, we're, as not being known, we traded a discount to our peer group based on our known gold ounces, notwithstanding the fact that they're the highest grade, they have the most growth prospectivity, and they're in an area that could probably lead to them being put into production quicker than some of these other deposits. So if we're trading at a discount on that basis, that means we're getting no value for anything else, or negative value, frankly. So one idea we had, which could A, unlock that value, but B, it would also allow these targets, which are, these are bona fide targets, it would provide for them the dedicated resources and, more importantly, the dedicated expertise to advance them at a quicker pace. Other than having them in white gold, we decided it would be a good idea to spin those out to our shareholders. And we're actually in the process of that now. We just announced it, and there'll be more details, record date, all that kind of stuff, I think, in very short order. But at a high level, those properties will get spun into a subsidiary, and then the shares of that subsidiary will get distributed to the shareholders. So if you're a shareholder of White Gold, you will be getting some amount of shares of this new subsidiary. And I think those are drill-ready projects. They're big. They're in the right place, and I think there's a lot of value creation opportunity on that as well. And so now we've moved out 6 properties. We have our 2 flagship properties, but each of the balance of these other properties, they all have their own targets. They're all very prospective. We've made new discoveries on some of them. Some of them are drill ready, and with this bigger budget and a bigger team and the guidance of Dylan, I think that, we are in a very good position to be making more discoveries and building more value in the next couple of years.
That's great. Yeah, and I look forward to receiving some of those
Yeah,
shares as a shareholder
absolutely.
of White
Good.
Gold. So, back to your main gold deposit, you're doing your PEA. It's not going to include the results from your 25 to 30,000 meter program,
Right. So yeah,
right?
they'll
Right.
actually happen around the drilling will start around the same time as the PA. So we'll get that out as a baseline, and then everything this year is growing from that.
Right, and I also saw a reference to the fact that you discovered you had a 7,000 meters of drilling that somehow did not get assayed. So what's that about? Is that bonus meters that we're going to see?
That's incredible. So I'm an accountant by trade, as you mentioned, and now we're going to get 7,000 meters of assays for whatever $50,000 it costs to put them in the lab. That's the cheapest meters you can ever imagine to have. This was one of the first things Dylan identified. He's been just such a great addition to our team. I can't understate that. Having new eyeballs sometimes is a benefit, but frankly, it's not a situation where it's really missed, because in the last several years where we've been having these smaller programs, what we decided strategically was not so much to focus on the main deposit itself. We thought we'd get better bang for our buck by looking to make new discoveries either in and around the main deposits or on some of these other properties. And we've been very successful. We discovered the Betty Ford, which is right contiguous to the Coffee, and we had an incredible high-grade oxide discovery there. We discovered other zones like within a kilometer of our Golden Saddle, like this Ryan surprise target. We've actually delineated that to a small resource. We've also identified another dozen lookalike targets in that area. So there hasn't really been much focus on that. But the story behind that is quite interesting. That discovery of the Golden Saddle was originally made by Sean Ryan on his team, working with a company called Underworld Resources, which Kinross bought, and then we bought the projects back from Kinross. But what had happened there is in 2009, the Underworld team made the discovery. In 2010, they came back and they did a significant amount of drilling to be able to prepare a maiden resource. By March 2011, they were acquired by Kinross. So the original team never had the time to go back and look at the data further. And when they were doing their assays the first go around, because they were moving so quickly and because they were in a different gold price environment, all they assayed was this rock unit where they hosted this ultra high grade gold, like some of the stuff you referenced there, like a 3 gram plus type material. And they just, didn't have a focus on these other areas. It looked interesting, but you were going to apply your resources where you felt you could kind of get the best value. And typically, as time progressed with the same team, you'll go back, you'll look at it, but it didn't happen. So it wasn't until this year when, number one, we had Dylan, who, again, as an outsider, I think is a huge point of validation for the opportunity here. Because a guy like that, being part of the Great Bear discovery, could have went anywhere. The fact that he came to White Gold, I think, really speaks volumes to the types of opportunity. He also likes this fact that, the size of the land package in a prospective area was exciting to him. But what really excited him the most is we had this good starter asset he could, work with to start, as he had spent his last several years with Kinross after Great Bear was acquired by them, growing that deposit from like 5 to 7 million ounces. So that's kind of his real forte, and he saw that type of an opportunity there. So as he was like picking apart this main deposit, which we had just updated in October, as you mentioned, he noticed some patchiness in the wireframes, and it didn't resonate to him because there was gold here, there was gold here, and it's pretty consistent. And so he then went and basically analyzed the drill logs for every single hole in the entire deposit, and he realized that 7,000 meters was never assayed.
Even though you have the core.
We have all the core. It
Yeah.
was sitting in his shack, and I guess at some point a few holes went nearby, and they saw that there was gold in it, and they said, "Wow, we can't leave this on the table." And so this year, we will be pulling all that core and bringing it into the lab. So he has now identified 2 zones of mineralization. So this high-grade main zone that we talked about, which is sensational and unique, but he's discovered all this gold sitting on top, which will only continue to further improve the economics, because that in a pit would have otherwise been waste. Now there's gold. And he's also identified this other high-grade subzone, which we've started to drill this year and identify as well. And this is all kind of within the pit. So that's the most economic type of ounces you can possibly ever find.
So effectively, you're drilling 25 to 30,000 ounces starting in May or so, and you're going to get the assay results from an additional 7,000 meters.
Yes,
Investors are going to get the benefit from
absolutely.
what effectively could be, 32 to
Yeah,
30,
exactly.
37,000. I guess those are bonus. So what seems obvious to me is, you have Agnico Eagle owns 19% of White Gold Corp. They now acquired an interest in the coffee project just south of you, which is very close by and contiguous there. If you're 4 or 5 million ounces of gold in the next year or two, God willing, and coffee's something of similar magnitude, doesn't it make sense for a merger of some sort to take place or an acquisition of both companies? Or obviously that's speculation, but it just seems.
There's immense synergies to do something like that. And big companies like Agnico, they like that type of a critical mass where they can really sink their teeth in. Like Agnico today is a very different company than 2017 when we did the deal with them. Back then, a 3 million ounce deposit was probably big enough to move the needle. They're now a $100 billion company, I think the second largest gold producer on the planet. So they need to see more scale. And, once you start getting north of 5 million ounces, that's the type of scale they need to see, and 5 million ounce with more growth potential. But having those two deposits right next to the door of each other, that's a very logical type of an approach to take. And, not, if we're going to speculate, we can do that a little bit. Like if you have a 10 million ounce deposit, that's probably could support 500,000 ounces a year of production. In the market today, a 500,000 ounce a year producer in a good place is probably north of $20 billion of market value, right? So obviously that's got to get built. Things have to happen. But I think that shows a bit of insight into the type of value that we're looking to create here. And whether it's Agnico or, somebody else, will see these type of good projects in good places. They are starting to become very few and far between. And I think they will start to get a lot of interest as these miners look to expand, which is something they haven't done a lot of in a long time. And another thing that probably most investors aren't as aware as someone like myself might be, having been involved in the exploration finance for the last 25 years. In the last decade, we have seen such a reduction in the amount of true exploration that's been done globally that the reserves are just not what they need to be today to support the amount of growth that these companies have planned. Now, mining companies aren't like software companies where you're a SaaS company, you can just sell the same code over and over again. You mine a pound of copper or an ounce of gold, that comes out of your reserves. And at some point, the analyst community is going to say, well, how are you going to continue on as a business indefinitely? So they will, and they have to, and this has always been the case, replace those reserves. And they do that either by their own exploration, which is happening, but even that has diminished, or by buying companies that have made these new discoveries. And I saw a stat not too long ago that, if you look at the new discovery rate globally, it's coming like this. And this stat, I don't know if it's exactly accurate, but it showed that there was no brand new gold discoveries of 2,000 ounces 2 million ounces or more globally in 2023 and 2024. And then there's obviously been one or two in 25, but the trend is very clear. And that's going to create a huge pinch point, I think, for the mining industry in general. That, in addition to the fact that we're losing personnel, which just makes all these assets more and more value. So then we have a company like a White Gold. We have already done that. Like we already have 3 million ounces. It's taken us 10 years and a couple $100 million to do that. So we're already that far ahead of the pack. But the market today is still not giving that a lot of value because it's the capital is still working its way down. But at some point, I think inevitably there will be a big re-rating across the sector, and then the companies with the best assets and the best places and the most growth potential and all those kind of good things will continue to outpace the pack from a value creation perspective.
Yeah. Well, you've got a very exciting year ahead of you, David. The PEA coming up is that May or June? You've got your 25 to 30,000 meter drill program that I guess, provide details on. We're going to get the bonus 7,000-meter assay results. You've got your spin out coming out. There's just so much happening.
Yeah, and I think it's good, and most importantly is the right time, and we're in a macro environment that's very supportive of this. You see internationally, commodities have now come to the forefront. They've been politicized, they've been weaponized. In Canada, the federal government has been very vocal about trying to secure supply chain and provide resources to help advance, you know, these mining different operations and permitting and figuring out how to do that as quickly and efficiently as possible. So far, we've been hearing all the right things we want to hear as a mining community. We've started to see action in that regard, which is great. You know, a specific example that I can point to is the Prime Minister's office has created a major projects office, which allows additional support to projects of national significance. One of those projects is called the Yukon Critical Resource Gateway, being anchored by that casino project. So that's brought a tremendous amount of interest and will bring additional infrastructure into the area. Infrastructure, White Gold will be the net and largest benefactor of that infrastructure. As these roads come in, that truly unlocks the leverage to the district. I hope and I plan that we can find other 3+ million ounce deposits, but we will also likely be finding many other smaller deposits. Now, if you find a small deposit in an area with no infrastructure and no other facilities, frankly, that's worth zero. But if we fast forward the next few years and the coffee's in production and our gold saddle's in production, there's roads in place, now you find something smaller, you can truck it to one of the other facilities, and now it's worth, literally hundreds of millions of dollars. And this is what you see in your other traditional mining camps across Canada and everywhere else in the world, in Timmins and Val-d'Or and all these places. So that is a huge value unlocked potential. Further on the political theme, there's been a government change in the Yukon. I believe the previous government was also very pro-mining, but this new government, the Yukon Party, they are the pro-business party. They have publicly stated that, accelerating mine permitting and getting mines into production is a priority for their party. The premier, I believe, is actually the son of a miner, so you couldn't have asked for a better scenario there. And then just having done this so long, it just feels like this is the right time of the cycle to be getting, well, the capital is fluid. It can go wherever it wants to, and it's been in NVIDIA and all these other places done very well. But I think that is shifting here, which just, again, further accelerates the development opportunities, brings down the cost of capital. So as Pierre Lassonde said, to quote him at his infamous speech up in the White Horse in last year, he's never seen the stars aligned as well as they are now for the mining industry. So we are extremely excited by that.
And 2026 could be a fantastic year for White Gold.
I believe it will be a truly transformative year for the company as we, really wear out the shoe leather to get in front of audiences, to get the story better known, do the work in the ground, and really kind of, identify the market that this is a true tier 1 project in one of the best mining areas of the world, and White Gold's fortunate to own basically almost the whole of the area.
David, thank you so much for taking the time today. This was really informative, and hopefully we can do this again after the release of your PEA. And good luck at PDAC, which is coming up in Toronto. And just for investors, this podcast is for information purposes only and should not be considered investment advice. So I think that wraps it up. And David, thanks once again.
Oh, thank you so much, Stephen. Always enjoy our conversation, and I'd love the opportunity to chat further after we've delivered on some of these exciting catalysts.
That would be great. Thank you.